Your Excellency, President José Ramos-Horta, Chancellor of the ANU, Professor Gareth Evans, Acting Vice-Chancellor, Professor Lawrence Cram, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephen Sherlock. I'm the Director of the Centre for Democratic Institutions. I'd like to wish you all a very warm welcome to the Centre for Democratic Institutions 2010 Annual Address. At the outset, let me acknowledge the first Australians on whose land we meet and whose culture, which is amongst the oldest continuing cultures in human history, we celebrate, the Ngunnawal people. The Centre for Democratic Institutions is Australia's democracy promotion organisation. It was established by the Australian Government in 1998. Our mandate is to focus on the strengthening of parliaments and political parties in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Our special focus is Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu and Fiji. The Centre is funded by AusAid as part of Australia's international aid program. And we are hosted here at ANU, at the Crawford School of Economics, in the College of Asia and the Pacific. Now, while the movement for democracy has made great strides across our region in recent years, we need to acknowledge that there have been setbacks. Moreover, we should never forget that democracy is a living thing. It's always a work in progress, in Australia and as elsewhere. And a number of states in our region face threats to their stability. Parliaments, political parties, national leaders all face real challenges in meeting the expectations of voters. And we always need to be alert to the danger of a disconnection between the needs of the electorate and the way national politics are actually conducted. And one of CDI's roles is to consider and to discuss how Australia's democratic experience might assist countries in our region to be more resilient and responsive in the face of these major challenges. And we do this through training courses in parliamentary governance, political party development, through applied research and scholarship. And Australia, we hope, in turn, will learn and be enriched through this interchange. As part of this effort, each year we host an annual address delivered by a leading political figure or scholar. The address is an opportunity to bring key issues relating to democracy in the region and around the world to an Australian audience. This year, we are honoured indeed to have an eminent national leader to address us. Ladies and gentlemen, I have pleasure in calling upon our Acting Vice-Chancellor, Professor Lawrence Cram, to introduce this year's speaker.
It's a great honour to introduce the President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, José Ramos-Horta. President Ramos-Horta is President of our newest independent neighbour, East Timor. Australians have watched the emergence of East Timor, initially with sympathy, but perhaps some ambiguity, then with concern and compassion, and finally with pride and with tangible support as the people of East Timor struggled for their independence and their liberty. We rejoiced with you when your country's proclamation of independence, first enunciated in 1975, was eventually realised in May 2002. President Ramos-Horta was a constant and vocal advocate for the East Timorese cause during this struggle for independence from 1975 to 1999 and beyond. A lone, persistent voice that stirred the world's conscience and eventually led to independence. For this, he was awarded as a co-recipient the Nobel Peace Prize in 1996. President Ramos-Horta studied international law in The Hague, peace studies in Strasbourg, foreign policy at Columbia University, and he is a senior associate member of Oxford University St Anthony's College. The Constitution of East Timor describes the Republic as a democratic, sovereign, independent and unitary state based on the rule of law, the will of the people and the respect of the dignity of the human person. As his country's first foreign minister, later its prime minister and now its second president, José Ramos-Horta has been central and critical to the process of ensuring that these words continue to guide the emergence and growth of the nation. It is with pride and with great pleasure that I call on President Ramos-Horta to deliver the 2010 annual address of the ANU Centre for Democratic Institutions.
Thank you so much, my friend Gareth Evans, Professor Lawrence Graham, Dr. Stephen Sherlock for inviting me to come to this great institution. I had been here many, many times in the past, and actually most of you probably don't know I was a student here. Maybe too obscure for anyone to have noticed, but I was here a student in 3 months in '75 under the personal guidance of Professor T.B. Miller. I was introduced to T.B. Miller by someone who became sympathetic to me personally, a journalist from Sydney Morning Herald, Hastings, what's his first name? Peter Hastings, now deceased a long time ago. He came to Timor, I looked after him in '74, and he advised that I should start doing some studies on ASEAN. So he put me in touch with T.B. Miller. T.B. Miller designed a 3-month introductory course on ASEAN. So I claim to be a student here. And not many people can claim to have the privilege of having such a famous professor just to yourself. So, and great to be here also with Gareth Evans. I have to say first to commend you, Gareth, for the exceptional work you did with the International Crisis Group. You catapulted that group to exceptional quality of its research that today continue to be a guide to many, many of us. And also for you and your Japanese colleague chairing the nuclear weapons non-proliferation review. And thank you also for what you did and was not recognized behind the scenes in regard to Timor-Leste. For many, many years, obviously, I, like many Australian friends, critical of Australian foreign policy at the time regard to Timor-Leste. One evening, I was having drinks in a pub in Osaka, Japan. I was there for the APEC meeting. Not that I had been invited, obviously I had not been invited. And a courageous young Canadian diplomat agreed to meet with me, and he suggested a pub somewhere in Osaka, and there we met. He was with the Canadian embassy in Jakarta. His name is Colin Stewart. And a very lovely young man, with a great heart. And we talk about, obviously, Timor-Leste and the role of the embassies in Jakarta. And he said, generally, the Western embassies meet once a week, and Timor always dominate the agenda. And they jointly make the march with the then Suharto regime. And obviously, always skeptical about Gareth Evans, the effect, And I say, and how about the Australians? Well, his answer was most surprising to me. He said, well, they are always the most vocal, the most active. In our meetings, in the march with the Indonesian side, they were always the most forceful. And he went on explaining about Gareth Evans' very strong behind-the-scenes march commitment. And so that for me, I was taken aback, and I felt embarrassed that we were publicly castigating them when actually behind the scenes they are doing what they thought was the most effective. So that's my apologies for calling you names a few times. It shows his greater heart in forgiving me for calling him names, for picketing his office in Canberra and so on. So I thank you, and thank all of you, Australian friends, from all walks of life, some deceased, like Ken Fry, and many, many others, Andrew McNaughton, in different spheres of life, of activities in this country, to help us bring about the new status of Timor-Leste. But today I have been asked to speak on the development of our democratic institutions. I will start by telling you to always remember, we are 8 years old country. It is not 10, it is not even 10, it is not 20, not 30, it's 8 years old country. And the UN in 1999 was mandated to assist the East Timorese in transition to independence. The Security Council gave a mandate to the Secretary General, Kofi Annan, who in turn nominated Sergio Vieira de Mello with a 2-year mission. And of course, the East Timorese gladly accepted that 2-year mission. And some even thought that was too long. I was a lonely voice in New York with the then the head of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, Monsieur Bernard Mier, arguing for a 5-year mission before independence. And he said, sympathetically, he said, if you manage to convince Security Council for a 2-year mandate, you will be lucky. Well, the Security Council gave the mandate to UNTAED for a 2-year. Well, when the crisis happened in 2006, and I went again to the Security Council, humble, embarrassed. I had been to the Security Council numerous times, going back there May 3rd or May 5th to address Security Council with the background of the crisis in Timor-Leste was most embarrassing, humiliating. And it was our failure. It was not the failure of anyone else. And I told the Security Council members whether anyone had any idea among the Security Council members how long it took. I just made up the story, made up the figures, to have a small, little Chinese takeaway business functioning in New York, in Manhattan. I said, it takes about 2 to 3 years to have a takeaway business food in one of those little restaurants. You know, you order the food, a Chinese guy come on a bicycle, deliver your fried rice and vegetables and so on. Well, that's what and then I said, and do you think you can have a nation state built up, function democracy, functioning institutions in 2 years? Well, there was silence in the room. Lunchtime, I was hosted to lunch, and all the Security Council members turned up. And the Ghanaian ambassador, he said, when I walked into the Security Council meeting, my mindset was that there were too many greater problems in the world the Security Council would be concerned to, and I would not support an extension of Security Council mission in Timor-Leste. He said, but when you compare, you brought up the comparison with a takeaway Chinese restaurant, he said, that really struck me. and he said, I changed my mind. Yeah. Well, my point is only to illustrate. Of course, if the Timorese side, because the Security Council, naturally, whenever you have a peacekeeping mission, the permanent members, particularly the United States and few richer countries, have to pay extra. And they always reluctant to have a peacekeeping mission because they all have to pay extra beyond the annual duty. Timor-Leste pays something like $16,000 a year as our fee to the United Nations, while the US, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars. On top of it, you have to pay for each assessed contribution for the Security Council missions. But the reality is, if the Security Council had agreed, and the Timorese side had agreed to a longer mandate, at least 5 years, maybe the crisis in 2006 would have been prevented. The crisis came from within the police and the army. If the UN had had a more targeted, focused mandate of 5 years, and if the East Timorese had had a consensus agreement that, yes, let's work with the UN, everybody, so that we prepare the country for 5 years in transition, and then independence, maybe the events of 2006 would not have happened. I recall also telling some donors meetings in Dili off-the-cuff remarks. Do not please begin by imposing austerity measures on a post-conflict country. And I use the expression, peace has to be paid for. In what way? Creating jobs, assisting the victims. But what happened was, in 2002, on accession to independence, by our annual budget of 2002 was a mere $68 million. Well, how can anyone address all the challenges that we face, you name it, with that miserable budget? On top of that, we had a very, very weak institutions. That's obvious. It was 2 years old. And we inherit a police force that was cobbled together by the UN, with at least 60% of them having served in the Indonesian National Police. We inherit them as well. That was a decision of the United Nations. We had inherited a guerrilla army. The guerrilla army transitioned to the beginnings of a modern conventional army. There was no justice sector to speak of, no economy to speak of. And yet, on 20th May 2002, after 2 years of transition, the flag of Timor went up, the UN flag went down, and Timor was declared, redeclared Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. Where we are today, in 2010, we went through the most serious crisis was 2006. In that regard, I wish to thank Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and Portugal. We knew we could not rely on the UN Security Council to approve a swift peace-enforcing mission to come and assist us in restoring law and order. So we decided to go to friendly countries, a combination of countries. One, Portugal, very loyal, distant, and in a remarkable feat, extraordinary for a small country. Besides the political will, they had the ability to deploy a force 20,000 miles away within a matter of days. NATO countries were impressed how Portugal managed to do it. with all their gear, all their equipment, armored vehicles, troops, and their own communications and so on, landing in Timor. Malaysia was also very impressive, how a developing country projected a force within days, Navy, helicopters, Air Force, to Timor within days. Besides the political response, which was quick, was swift, following our request, they managed to deploy their troops to Timor quickly. Australia and New Zealand, obvious, two countries with all known resources. So we thank them for promptly assisting us. But that particular arrangement created some controversy among friends in New York at the UN. Some had misgivings that it was not going to be a peacekeeping under UN control. So we began a novel experiment, and that is bilateral arrangement between the host country, Timor-Leste, with friendly countries, and then entering into a trilateral agreement between us, the forces, and the UN. Intricate, complex negotiations on the authority, chain of command, coordination, and so on. I have to say, now 4 years later, it has been an exceptional experience. I would say almost flawless in the relationship between the four. Of course, Portugal and Malaysia transitioned to under UN when UNMIT was created in August 2006, while Australia and New Zealand remain as a separate force, but still with a valid agreement with Timor-Leste and a valid agreement with the UN to provide assistance to the United Nations. So it was a novel experiment. This was necessitated by our realization that the UN Security Council would not be able to agree to deploy an effective force. Evidence of this is that the UN had agreed only by August to create UNMIT with 1,400 or 500 police officers. By December, 6 months more or less later, only few hundred had arrived on the ground. This is not criticism of the UN. The UN does not have a standing army, to receive the orders from the Secretary General to deploy wherever. Whenever there is a peacekeeping, you have to mobilize interested countries to provide the troops, the police, civilians, and so on. So that was one significant setback into 2006, resulted from fragility in the two security institutions, but also resulted from lack of dialogue, lack of institutional transparency, partnership, cooperation between the various institutions and leadership in the country. 4 years after the situation that developed in 2006, I'm happy to say the country today is at most peace than ever before. I'm happy to share with you some data, because some in Australia, in the media, still perceive Timor-Leste as very dangerous. But let me share with you some of the data from the United Nations Police Force about criminality in Timor compared with other countries. I have here homicide per 100,000. Timor-Leste, 8.3 per 100,000. World average is 10. Russia, 20.1. Malaysia is lower than Timor, Bangladesh lower than Timor, Philippines is much higher, and guess US, much higher than Timor-Leste. The US is 5.6. Assault, again, per 100,000. The data is from 2008. Timor-Leste, 169.1 per 100,000. Australia, perceived to be one of the safest places on earth, you should be worried. 796 cases of assault, so many times higher than Timor-Leste. US, one less than Australia. US is 795 cases. So this is, of course, I don't want to trivialize this or to boast. Obviously, there is also a question of, you can have a riot every day in Canberra or in Melbourne or Sydney. You can have a riot all over the US. But generally, the population, the society doesn't lose sleep over it because there is trust in the institutions that will handle this. In Timor-Leste, even with me, as if I see smoke many miles away, I wonder what is going on there. Has someone burned a few houses there? And where is the police? So there is still not the same confidence in the institutions of the state that deal with law and order, like you have in Australia and the United States. But even in that, we have made tremendous progress. If you had gone to the people in 2006 and asked whether they have a confidence in the government, in the leadership, their answer would have been very, very negative. For instance, a census survey done by the International Republican Institute, they asked about the Prime Minister performance. Total good rating, 79%. That was end of 2008. If they had gone and asked the question in 2006, it would have been probably extremely low. And that was applicable to all of us, Timorese political leadership. I'm embarrassed to say the approval rate of the president, because it's so low, I wouldn't even want to share with you. Well, anyway, it is not terribly important. The important is the so the importance is the trust in the institutions. If they had gone and asked about that people's approval of our national police in 2006, I guarantee would have been zero trust. If it had gone and asked our defense forces, it probably would be also very, very low. Surprisingly, this data shows public confidence in our national police at 82% in 2008. On our defense force, 79%. So in only 3 years, since the tragic problems of 2006, we have made tremendous recovery in the trust in the institutions by the people who we are supposed to serve. The economy that was contracted below zero after the departure of the UN in 2002, 2003, began to recover by 2005 with something like 5% or 6%, but then nosedive in 2006, contract below zero. Following the parliamentary elections in 2007, that was won by Fred Ling. Fred Ling had a few points ahead of every other party, but was not able to form a viable government, so we had a coalition government of 5 parties. But by the end of 2007, the economy already grew 7%. In 2008, it grew more than 12%. And it has been steady growth, result of more generous, risky, aggressive policies of the government in injecting money in the local economy, but also in doing cash transfers that maybe 10 years ago most economists would criticize. International financial institutions would find it very unusual to do, just to hand over cash to poor people. Well, for many years, I argue with my colleagues in the government. Not being an economist, obviously, I confess I know little about it, but I know a bit about people suffering, about the need to help poor people. And my argument was, we can all be very happy, very proud that our petroleum fund is getting fatter and fatter, not out of our ingenuity, but the reality is the oil price also drives up cost of consumer goods. Anything that is imported, price goes up. We have to find ways how to transfer some of this excess cash into the pockets of the poor. Obviously, we do it in many ways. We do it, I hope no one fell off. Sorry. We do it many ways. Obviously, education, investing more in education, in health, in youth programs, infrastructure to create jobs that bring money into the families and so on. But also there is need for doing direct cash transfer. And that's what I argue. And I argue with my colleagues by simply saying, we give some cash to the poor, he or she is not going to rush going to Denpasar holidays or going to Singapore to do duty-free shopping. A poor woman, a poor man, getting $20, $30. I was arguing for more. I was arguing $40 a person. But the government, more prudent than me, went for $20 per person, anyone over the age 60. Well, it would generate money into the local economy. And this is what is happening. People start buying more vegetables, more eggs. People who know others are getting more purchasing power. They are growing more vegetables and more eggs and so on. This year, the money, the cash for poor people went up to $30. So we have done all of this in order to address the abject issues of extreme poverty, but at the same time, create conditions of peace, of social peace in the country. The economy continues to grow, and if the Prime Minister, Xanana Guzmão, is able to, with the Fretilin Party, the largest party, but also civil society, towards September, that his target, to have the strategic development plan going to the Parliament and approved by the Parliament. I hope that it becomes a consensus blueprint. I hope that it will not be a strategic development plan that is imposed by a majority in the Parliament. It has to be a consensus document. It is an innovative, aggressive, proactive blueprint that all things consider in conditions of peace and stability, transparency, accountability, no corruption, no waste, according to the vision, the dream of the Prime Minister, and we all share that. By 2030, so within 20 years, Timor-Leste would be catapulted to a high middle income country with illiteracy disappearing, extreme poverty disappearing, and so on. But these are big ifs in that conditions of peace, of tightly controlled with fiscal rigor, and so on. These are the multiple challenges we face. And we are not doing too bad. A few days ago, on the 20th, we did the first Dili International Marathon. More than 1,000 people participated. I also participated. I did the 5-kilometer one, and I won. The Australian ambassador, Peter Hayward, and his wife came at least 200 meters behind. And a Kenyan, it has to be a Kenyan, won the full marathon, 42 kilometers, in absolutely flawless conditions of security, safety. Everybody were impressed. Last year, we did the first bike race, 450 kilometers, also absolutely flawless, without any problems. and numerous other initiatives of this nature, sports, cultural, and so on. August this year, we will do the first ever, and to be repeated every year to become a permanent feature, the Hatu Biliku Music and Cultural Festival. Hatu Biliku is the highest town in Timor-Leste. This is all part of our program, Dili City of Peace. Sports is important as a physical exercise, but also is part of peacemaking, peace building in any society, particularly in transition, post-conflict countries. And I'm saying this with personal experience, observing how the behavior of people changed just in the last 2 years of these exercises that we do. Last but not least, in doing all of this, and forgive me for my rambling speech, I have no notes, I had no time to prepare an academic paper for all of you. I try to give you, some elements for you to digest. But in all of this, we also had to mend relations with Indonesia. We have to gain the trust, the respect of our ASEAN neighbors to enable us to gain membership into ASEAN. And the relationship with Indonesia, we all know, very complex. Some very noble in their attitude, saying that we, Timor-Leste, should push for an international tribunal, and so on and so on. Even the UN, some in New York at the UN Secretariat, not the Security Council, the Secretariat in New York, some is still talking about international justice. Well, our relationship today with Indonesia is exemplary, the best possible of any two countries having a relationship. In '99, most experts, and I presume security experts from the ANU or anyone, would have written about Timor-Leste and would have tried to look at the prognosis of threats, probably would have seen the border area, the so-called militias, as a possible destabilizing factor to Timor-Leste. Well, our border has been one of the most peaceful of any border anywhere in the world. The former militias, by hundreds of them, who living in West Timor and elsewhere in Indonesia, have not presented any minor threat to Timor-Leste stability. Indonesia has been in the forefront of all the ASEAN countries, with other ASEAN countries, Malaysia, for instance, Philippines, in supporting our membership, first in ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum, that we adhere to in 2005. Now, Indonesia has assigned now for the past 2 years, a senior diplomat advising our foreign ministry and the government in membership accession to ASEAN. But in 1999-2000, when we were evaluating the relationship with Indonesia, what to do, it was not only a pragmatic calculation that we better behave, we better don't pursue international justice, otherwise our border will destabilize, Indonesia will retaliate. We didn't think much of that. What we thought was, Timor-Leste was freed in '99 because Indonesians freed themselves. I guarantee you, and as I've told repeatedly my countrymen and women, if Indonesia had not willingly negotiated with Kofi Annan, and it was none other than current President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono who negotiated with Kofi Annan, Indonesia exit from Timor-Leste, there would have been no interfact. Australia and the other coalition partners would not have invaded Timor-Leste and confronting the Indonesian army on the ground. Who would have the political will and the absolute lack of wisdom to land troops there? It was easy to demand the UN should send troops there. Well, if the other side say no, no one was going to do it. And I give an example of Burma. They had elections. the military defied the election 15 years ago. Has anyone had the political will, yes, to demand changes, but has had anyone been able to enforce changes in Myanmar when the military refused to comply with the election result till today? Well, so that's one consideration. And it was almost unprecedented in recent history of a country like Indonesia agreeing to depart from a territory that for the previous 24 years they considered to be theirs. And it was in incredibly difficult circumstances for Indonesia. A weak president, fragile situation. How are you going to tell an army that had already lost so many men there, well, after all, sorry, it was a mistake, you have to leave? And what is also remarkable, that even though it was a weak president, chaotic situation in Indonesia, as I might recall, from the fall of Suharto as consequence of the Asia economic financial crisis, and yet an army that was not entirely disciplined, but they obeyed the political orders and from their generals to leave. And they left. Yes, leaving behind a lot of destruction, but that destruction was not only by the Indonesian army. Our own people were involved in that, the so-called militias. But then we also look at Indonesia's transition. This is a golden opportunity for Indonesia to change from the past. And it would not be wise on our part to push for an international tribunal that would really complicate matters for Indonesia. So we decide, no, the greatest act of justice that has been done to us is that today we are free. So let's honor the dead, look after the survivors, mend relations with the region, and move on. The best justice, the best tribute we can provide to the fallen heroes, the victims, the martyrs, is to build a peaceful, prosperous, free society. Justice will take its course, but not imposed by little East Timor or by the international community. As the Indonesian society evolves, as their democracy consolidates, they are the ones who will do justice to Indonesian victims of past abuses by the past regime in many places in Indonesia. Maybe one day a young prosecutor in Indonesia will emerge and will review all the files of the past. But that will be done by then when their democracy has been consolidated and when they feel they can do it. This has been experienced everywhere. I was in Chile in '97. Pinochet was still around. He was no longer in office, but he was still around. The army was still all-powerful. The victims were angry. But back then, if they had decided to put on trial everyone related to the previous situation, the army would be in the streets. They waited. Today, unthinkable that the army would be in the streets. The same with Argentina. And some would say lack of justice generate impunity and create conflict. Well, this is not tested throughout history, recent history. Look at Portugal and Spain. Both had similar dictatorship for almost 40 years. Not a single tribunal was set up either in Portugal or Spain to deal with past fascist dictatorship. And yet no one saying that the two countries are not flourishing robust democracies. And the list can go on. The most notable is South Africa and many other situations. International tribunals were created. I stand ready to be challenged, but in my review of history since World War II, I believe I'm correct in submitting this. International tribunals were always created by the victorious power against a defeated one. World War II, Japan and Germany, and more recent ex-Yugoslavia. A tribunal was only set up after Serbia was bombed to a stone age. Rwanda, the other side was defeated, the new side imposed a tribunal, and so on and so on. When you have a prolonged conflict where there are no winners and losers, let's call it all are winners because the war is over. In the process of leading to the end of the conflict, I do not recall having done thorough research myself of a single case in which the negotiations leading to the end of the conflict by the two sides or various sides involved had any discussion on a tribunal. I spoke recently in Geneva in answering a question from the audience, someone from the audience. I put this hypothetical question to some students because it was one university in Geneva. Assuming, there was a young lady in front, I was assuming, Madame, you are Do Aung San Suu Kyi, and I, General Tan Sui. I don't know if you're familiar with General Tan Sui from Burma. We both are sitting face to face to resolve the deadlock in Myanmar. We agree on a roadmap towards transition towards democracy in Burma. And at one point, Suu Kyi tell me, Tan Sui, well, but Mr. General, all of this fine, but on this roadmap, in the middle of somewhere at the end, we have to put something about you and all your cohorts going to jail. Well, that would be a real exercise in negotiations in diplomacy. So it's not only to trivialize justice, only to say that sometimes in the fight for democracy, the fight for human rights, the fight for justice, you have to be wise. There, yes, you get somewhere. That's why, again and again, I try to explain. In my country, I guarantee you, the overwhelming majority of the people, the simple people in the streets, agree with that. In 2005, if I'm not mistaken, or 2004, SBY, President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, we call him always SBY, like most Indonesians call him SBY. His first state visit after his first election was to Timor-Leste. I was foreign minister at the time, and I volunteered to be the so-called minister in attendance. I don't know whether you have this in the Australian protocol, but in Asia you have a vice head of state, and a minister is assigned to look after the vice head of state. And I volunteered to look after SBY. Well, I went with him to the cemetery, Santa Cruz Cemetery. As we left the cemetery, people were gathering outside. And then we would go next to the Indonesian military cemetery, which is just a few steps away. The protocol, the security wanted us to get back into the cars and go to the military cemetery. I told SBY, Mr. President, if you agree, we just walk. And he agreed. And I said, if you don't mind, I would like you to greet these people. And he went. Well, that's when a chaos happened, but chaos in the positive sense. Everybody wanted to shake his hands. One older man cried, but cried in sincere emotion about how we came back together. It was fantastic reaction of the people. We went back to the cars towards the parliament. In Timor-Leste, we have this unfortunate situation where the university is right across the street from the parliament. When students want to do anything, they don't even have to pay a bus fare or anything. Just stand on the other side of the road and you have your demonstration. So I told SBY, I explained to him, we have this university right in front of the parliament and we are going right there. And I was sure there will be hundreds of students there. So I told him, Mr. President, when we get off the car, we don't go straight to the parliament. You turn around and greet the students. And he did. It was extraordinary reaction. Well, I later, after SBY's departure, I phoned, at the time, the Special President of Secretary General, Sukihiro Hasegawa from Japan. I said, Suki, do you want a referendum on our policies of reconciliation with Indonesia? You got it today in the streets of Dili. That the people spoke, that they agree completely with it. Last but not least, as I end, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to pay tribute to Australian soldiers who died in Afghanistan. I know it is a great loss for Australian families, for the Australian people, and for the Australian Army. It is a tragic loss. This is creating debate, obviously, reflection in Australia about Australian commitment to the war effort in Afghanistan. It will be up to the Australian people, government, to decide the next course of action. But here I want only to pay tribute to condolences to the families, to the brave Australians. Yesterday in Timor-Leste, 2 Portuguese special police officers died in a tragic car accident. They had been called by the local people to go to defuse explosives from World War II. So they headed there, full speed. The car fell over in a curb, and 2 young men were killed. So 2 young men, Portuguese soldiers, killed by accident, and ironically from explosives left behind from World War II, as they are going to try to defuse those weapons. 3 died in Afghanistan. These 2 very remote situations, and I say remote situations because very, very far, very different in nature, and yet they illustrate the absolute necessity for the international community to stay engaged, committed in situations like ours, in situations like Afghanistan or anywhere. There are costs that Australians and the US and many others are paying, Afghans are paying. One of the most touching moments for me watching the situation in Afghanistan was when I saw millions of men and particularly women defying the Taliban and going to vote. And can you ever abandon these people who put trust in the international community? Many people paid their lives in challenging the Taliban and other extremists. So this is the message I leave here tonight, and also to thank profusely Australia for its support to Timor-Leste, past government, started with John Howard, with current government. Australia aid has actually increased from the previous government to today. There has been debate, criticism about general international aid to Timor-Leste. I have been one of the undiplomatic critics of this aid, sometimes maybe unfairly, but sometimes we get very frustrated. Do you realize, at least I'm told by our Ministry of Finance, that there have been more than 3,000 papers done on Timor-Leste, 3,000 reports and papers. We have been psychoanalyzed from every angle. On me alone, probably there's something like 100 academic papers psychoanalyzing me. Billions of dollars allegedly have been spent on East Timor. Yes, it's correct, on East Timor, not necessarily in East Timor. This does not mean that all of the aid has been mismanaged or poorly targeted. But don't blame the East Timorese, because the donor community tend to blame the East Timorese, because we don't have any budget assistance. The foreign aid is managed by the donor countries with their local partners. Sometimes, yes, it is the government, like Minister of Health, but the disbursement either come from the donor country or through multilateral bodies like the UNDP or the World Bank. But I'm very pleased that both Australia and all other countries are reviewing how they are spending their money in Timor-Leste. Because this is the same problem happening in Afghanistan, where Afghans criticize or complain that so much of very high percentage of the money goes out, that is not spent in the country. So it is in our collective interest, because Australian taxpayers, American taxpayers, Japanese, they want to know what is the impact of their money in addressing poverty in Timor, in Afghanistan, or in Bangladesh. Has it made a difference in the last 50 years? Has this aid lifted people out of extreme poverty? Has it really improved water supply to poorest people? And that's the question that I know has been debated by Australia. And I'm pleased with the current strategy paper that has been done with the Timorese government. So I believe that the next few years we will see a more refocused attention by Australian aid on Timor-Leste. I thank you. God bless you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, for your address tonight. On behalf of all the audience here tonight, that you have been an inspiring figure for a whole generation of Australians. For myself personally, I remember as an undergraduate student way back in 1976, at probably the darkest days of the conflict in East Timor, the very first piece of writing I ever had published was on the struggle in East Timor. Only in the student newspaper, but I felt like I was at least making a small contribution. So in the small amount of time that we have remaining, we have just a small amount of time for questions. So if you'd like to make any sort of, give any sort of question for the President, please just raise your hand. Just time for one or two questions.
President, thank you very much. Carmen Lindemann, University of Melbourne. Thank you especially for your insights on the role of how perceptions of justice have helped towards maintaining stability and maintaining peace, especially in relation to Indonesia. I was interested in your views, especially about the role of the extraction of gas and oil, and whether what mechanisms should be in place to ensure the equitable distribution of these resources, and if there could be what role it could play in further maintaining peace and stability in Timor-Leste. But thank you very much.
Before I answer that, I would like to say with me in this room, our Foreign Minister, Dr. Zacarias Costa, the Minister for Economy and Development, Mr. John Gonsalves, and the Ambassador to Australia, Abel Guterres. Abel Guterres was many years in Melbourne. The best bus driver in Melbourne was Abel Guterres. He was a bus driver for 20 years or something like that. And then went to Oxford after 99 to do diplomatic studies, and Consul General in Sydney, and now Ambassador in Canberra. And many other of my staff of the Foreign Ministry who are here. I would like particularly to also introduce an Australian Army person who has been working with me for the past 3 years, Mick Stone. In relation to your question, in 2004, the Parliament passed a law, the so-called petroleum law, and established the Petroleum Fund. That was advised in part by Norway. Norway has one of the best petroleum fund management, and we learned from that and improved on the Norwegian experience, and it's called Norway Plus, meaning we went beyond the Norwegian model. And advised by the Norwegians, the World Bank, the US, Australia, and other countries, how to put in place the best possible mechanism that would ensure that the revenues from oil and gas would not be wasted by those in office. Today, it's still seen by, for instance, international bodies like the Extractive Industries Initiative as one of the best petroleum funds in the world. We have a modest petroleum fund now, a bit over $5 billion or $6 billion now, which is far more than we anticipated a few years ago. And under the law, 90% has to be invested in US Treasury bonds, 10% to be invested in diversified portfolio. But back then, because the government was conscious that we didn't have experience, capacity to invest, prudently and wisely the 10%, we decided to put all of it in the US Treasury bond. Well, unlike our teachers, Norway, Timor-Leste didn't lose any money in the financial crisis of the last 2 years, while Norway lost tens of billions of dollars. Because they changed it in 2007, I think, they changed the ratio of the bonds and diversified portfolio, and they lost. And many other countries the same. Timor-Leste didn't. And it is not by chance, as some cynics I saw somewhere written that, well, just because they didn't know where to invest, so they put everything. No, it was a prudent decision, and credit goes to Dr. Mari Al-Khatiri. You cannot find a more prudent, cautious person than him. It was a deliberate decision. Said, no, we don't have experience, we don't have expertise, let's put it there. Now the government is reviewing where to spend the 10 billion, the 10%. The 90% remains in US Treasury bonds. But the question is, why would we put $5 billion in US Treasury bonds? And why not bringing at least a good portion of this money back into the country to invest quicker in the infrastructure? This is the debate that is going on, and risky, because we have just enough capacity of absorption, of budget execution. How much money can we actually inject into the country, but with prudent management, with results. So that's the dilemma that is going on. So if we did not have this Bayundan, well, I don't know where we would be today. Without the oil and gas revenues, our revenues, non-oil and gas revenues, will be like maybe at best 100 million a year. At best. I think it's less than that, much less. I'm not sure of the figure. I think $40 million in tax collection. I don't want to think about it. Luckily, God has been on our side. Luckily, we agree with Australia on the Bayundan in 2001. I was here in Canberra also a number of times in negotiations with Alexander Downer. Sometimes, he and I would meet in the long corridor of the parliament, near his office, like two clandestine operators, underground operators, talking, to try to break the deadlock. Had we not agreed on that in May 20, 2002, where would our revenues come from? So we are, and it is, of course, the treaty was our creation with Australia, but the oil and gas is God-given. But if we didn't have that, I wouldn't know where we would be. So, and so far, and the process is the government, under our law, the government cannot does not have direct access to the petroleum fund. It has always to go through the budget process. And the Prime Minister, the government, spent 1 month in the Parliament debating, defending the budget that is scrutinized item by item. Our media, civil society, NGOs, all scrutinize the budget. So that's how we ensure accountability. It's not that everything is black and white. You know, there is waste. The Prime Minister is aware of that, so we set up the Anti-Corruption Commission, strengthening the Office of Prosecutor General, the Ombudsman, all the mechanisms that deal with governance and the corruption. And sometimes it's just the government doesn't have the resources, experience. And I speak about it ad nauseum. Like the other day, I went to Oikusi, you know, the district in Oikusi, to inaugurate 2 residences for our district prosecutors. 2 buildings with the fence, everything completed, $160,000, brand new building. Well, and that's done by, the prosecutor was in charge of that. Very tough little lady, I tell you. And I know from personal experience because she's my ex-wife. But if the same 2 houses had been done by the Public Works, the Secretary of State of Public Works, Minister of Infrastructure, it would have cost $600,000 or more. Sometimes a laptop that you buy in the shop costs $1,000. You trust the civil servants to do the so-called procurement. Well, it's always $4,000. And often the ministers, and this is a reality, we have civil servants, like you have in Australia, who they are masters of their job. Some are good, most of them honest, some are not. The ministers, some of them come from the university, some come from NGO, no experience whatsoever, absolutely naive. The Director General, who has been there for 30 years, he comes with the papers. The minister is busy, doesn't check the prices and sign off. So this is one real problem. How to inspect the roads. We don't have a monitoring inspection experts. So as the money increases that is available, more chances of waste. But we realize that. The Prime Minister is very, very conscious about that. And we are doing our very best so that the oil money is properly used.
Well, thank you very much again, Mr. President. I'm afraid we have run out of time now. So it just remains now for me to hand over to the Chancellor of the ANU, Professor Gareth Evans, to thank President Ramos-Horta.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. President, for returning to your alma mater to share this occasion with us, an occasion, I should add, on which, as always, we do express our respect for the first Australians, the traditional owners on whose land we meet and whose culture we do continue to celebrate. It was a huge pleasure to listen to you speaking to us tonight. Discursive it might have been, but substantive, compelling, thoughtful, generous and human, and leaving us in absolutely no doubt, if ever we did doubt, that Timor-Leste is back on track, its democratic and developmental future is assured, it's headed for an ever better future, and its leadership is in outstanding hands. You're right to imply, as you did at the outset, a certain piquancy in me sharing this stage with you. You, the justly acclaimed hero of independence, me for so long painted as the villainous defender of the indefensible. And I do appreciate you saying just a little bit to indicate that the truth It's just a little bit more complex than that. I think at the very least you've saved me from being pelted with eggs by at least some in this audience as I leave tonight. It's perhaps worth spending just a moment, though, to describe the kind of environment that we found ourselves in government, in dealing with the situation, because really was one of the most harrowing of my entire public policy experience. Like I guess everyone here tonight, I hated what happened in 1975. I desperately wanted to be somehow able to redress that. But the reality of the situation we confronted, by the time I came into office anyway, late 80s, was one in which Indonesian sovereignty, the reality of it, seemed to be entrenched. The mindset of dominance and absolute unwillingness to relinquish that dominance and overlordship seemed absolutely entrenched. And of course, there was no obvious military or other option to deal with that reality. But that didn't, of course, mean that the situation in East Timor, as we used to then call it, Timor-Leste, was defensible or sustainable. There was a desperate need to get the Indonesian military out, to get development assistance in, to get the culture and the language of Timor-Leste recognised, to get, if not complete independence, at least very, very substantial autonomy. And that's what really we were fighting for those years. Independence was a dream that José never let die, his colleagues never let die, but one that frankly seemed to just about all of us to be unattainable. And what we were working for like hell behind the scenes with the Indonesians, UN and elsewhere, was some greater degree of autonomy. And there's a lot of sympathy from some of the senior Indonesians for that. Ali Alatas in particular, foreign ministry certainly, but not from others. What changed it all, really what did change it all in an utterly, I think, unexpected way in retrospect, was that extraordinary series of events which unfolded after 97, the economic, financial meltdown in Asia, the way in which that led to the meltdown of President Suharto's political fortunes, his replacement by President Habibie, the extraordinary decision by President Habibie, which nobody could have anticipated, to go to a referendum putting to the people of Timor-Leste the options of independence and autonomy, doing so not because he thought for a moment the independence option was going to be achieved, but because he thought that would demonstrate the actual commitment to the continuity of Indonesian sovereign presence. And then the huge upset to the Indonesians when that referendum result delivered what we all knew to be the true feelings of the Timor-Leste people, and everything else that followed from that, the tumult, the horror, the triumph, the exultation, everything that followed from that is now history. What an extraordinary history it's been, and what an extraordinary contribution to that history José Ramos-Horta has played. As someone who fought as you did the cause all the way through from the 1970s, all those horrendously difficult years, as someone who had achieved by a decade ago everything you could possibly have wanted to achieve in terms of the independence of your country, everything that you could have perhaps hoped to achieve personally, not least the award, of course, of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1996. You, José, could have had for the taking just about any comfortable and interesting job on offer anywhere in the world. But you chose, of course, to come back to your new country and to work to create the country in which we all now have such a huge sense of confidence and optimism. You chose to come back, first of all, as Foreign Minister, then as Prime Minister, now as President. Your job has put you, at times, at great physical risk, as we all know from the horrible assassination attempt in 2008. It's placed huge demands upon you, the security issues, the social and economic development issues, the resource diplomacy issues, which we touched on just at the end, the international relations issues. But you have handled those challenges magnificently. Timor-Leste is a country that has made its mark. It can now only go from strength to strength. And I think all of us tonight have had a sense of just how central a role that you have played in creating that reality. We're indebted to you, José. We're indebted to you for everything that you said tonight, for everything you stand for everything you've achieved, and above all, I think we're indebted to you for what you are, a very warm and decent human being. Thank you for being with us tonight.